What if the most dangerous fat in your body isn't the fat you can see in the mirror, but the hidden fat silently wrapping around your organs, accelerating disease, draining your energy, and shortening your life, while you feel almost nothing? Welcome, and thank you for being here. Before we begin, take a slow breath net because breathing burns visceral fat, though every breath is part of your metabolism, but because understanding the body begins with attention. And attention is where transformation starts. There is a kind of fat in the human body that is far more dangerous than the fat we see beneath the skin. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not always distort appearance in obvious ways. Some people carry it even while looking normal on the outside. This fat is called visceral fat, the deep abdominal fat stored around your liver, pancreas, intestines, and other vital organs, and unlike the fat beneath your skin, visceral fat is metabolically active. It releases inflammatory chemicals, it disrupts hormones, it interferes with insulin, it strains the liver, it increases the risk of heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver, and even cognitive decline. In many ways, visceral fat behaves less like stored energy and more like an active biological threat. Visceral fat is often the first fat your body is willing to burn if you create the right internal conditions. Today, I want to guide you through the fastest, scientifically grounded way to shrink visceral fat, not through gimmicks, not through punishment, but through understanding base. When you understand how the body stores fat, you begin to understand how the body releases it. The process is both deeply biological and deeply philosophical. Because losing visceral fat is not merely about becoming smaller. It is about becoming metabolically freer. First, understand why visceral fat accumulates. As body does not store visceral fat randomly. It stores it in response to excess energy, hormonal imbalance, chronic stress, poor sleep, and inactivity. Every time blood sugar spikes dramatically, insulin rises. Insulin's role is essential. It moves glucose out of the blood and into cells, but when insulin remains elevated too often, the body enters a state of fat storage dominance. The liver converts excess energy into fat, and much of that fat is stored deep in the abdomen. This is why visceral fat is so strongly associated with insulin resistance. It is not simply the result of eating too much. It is the result of metabolic signals telling the body to store rather than burn. And the fastest way to shrink visceral fat is to reverse those signals. This means doing three things: lower insulin, increase fat oxidation, reduce inflammation. When these three conditions are met, visceral fat begins to shrink, sometimes surprisingly quickly. The fastest nutritional strategy: reduce insulin by controlling carbohydrates. If visceral fat grows in an insulin-dominant environment, then shrinking it begins by lowering insulin. The most direct way to do this is to reduce the foods that spike blood sugar rapidly: refined sugar, white bread, sugary drinks, pastries, highly processed carbohydrates. These foods digest quickly, flood the bloodstream with glucose, and force insulin upward. And when insulin remains high, fat burning slows dramatically. The body cannot efficiently burn stored fat while being told that incoming energy is abundant. This is why one of the fastest ways to shrink visceral fat is to replace refined carbohydrates with protein, fiber, and healthy fats. Protein stabilizes blood sugar. Fiber slows glucose absorption. Healthy fats reduce hunger and insulin spikes. This simple shift changes the metabolic conversation inside the body. Instead of saying, "store energy," the body begins hearing, "you stored energy," and when that happens, visceral fat becomes available as fuel. This is one reason why low-carb and whole food approaches often reduce belly fat faster than calorie reduction. The body listens to chemistry, not arithmetic. The second fastest lever: intermittent fasting. Flowering insulin is one key. Then extending the time insulin stays low is another. This is where intermittent fasting becomes powerful. When we eat constantly: breakfast, snacks, lunch, snacks, dinner, Desert insulin rises repeatedly throughout the day. The body spends very little time in a true fat-burning state, but when you create longer spaces between meals, insulin has time to fall. And when insulin falls, the body shifts toward lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat. This is especially effective for visceral fat. Why? Because visceral fat is more metabolically active than subcutaneous fat. A simple fasting pattern such as eating within an 8-hour window and fasting for 16 hours can help create that hormonal shift during fasting. The body begins to rely less on incoming calories and more on stored energy, and deep abdominal fat becomes one of the first sources used. This is not starvation, this is metabolic flexibility. The body was designed for periods without food. In fact, fasting reminds the body of an ancient rhythm: eat, use, rest, repair. In the modern world, constant eating interrupts that rhythm. Restoring it can unlock visceral fat loss surprisingly fast. The third critical factor: strength training. Many people believe cardio is the fastest path to losing belly fat, but scientifically, building muscle is one of the fastest ways to improve fat metabolism. Muscle tissue is metabolically demanding. The more lean muscle you carry, the more energy your body uses even at rest. Strength training increases insulin sensitivity. That means glucose is moved into muscle more efficiently, reducing the need for high insulin levels. And lower insulin means easier access to stored fat. Strength training also creates a powerful hormonal environment. Growth hormone rises. Glucose uptake improves. Metabolic rate increases. This does not mean endless hours in the gym. It means consistent resistance: squats, push-ups, rows, deadlift, stoity exercise. These movements tell the body, preserve muscle, burn fuel, and when the body preserves muscle, it is more willing to burn fat, including visceral fat. Cardio burns calories during the workout. Muscle changes metabolism all day. And metabolism, not exhaustion, is the real engine of fat loss. The hidden factor most people ignore: stress. Here is where science meets something deeply human. You can eat well, you can exercise, you can fast, but if stress remains chronically high, visceral fat often remains stubborn. Why? Because chronic stress elevates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol raises blood sugar too. Prepare for perceived danger. Repeated cortisol spikes contribute to insulin resistance, and chronically elevated cortisol strongly promotes fat storage around the abdomen. In other words, stress biologically encourages visceral fat accumulation. This means emotional overload is not just psychological. It becomes metabolic. The body interprets chronic stress as a signal to store energy. This is why sleep deprivation, anxiety, overwork, and constant stimulation can drive belly fat even without dramatic overeating. And this reveals something profound: the body responds not only to food, but to experience. The mind shapes metabolism. So one of the fastest ways to reduce visceral fat is to reduce the stress signals, telling the body to hold onto it. That means deep sleep, quiet walks, breathing. Geschistergy are not luxurious, they are metabolic tools. Beckhaus healing hormones thrive in calm sleep. The underestimated fat loss accelerator. Sleep is one of the fastest visceral fat regulators available and one of the most neglected. Poor sleep increases hunger hormones like ghrelin and reduces satiety hormones like leptin. This makes cravings stronger. At the same time, sleep deprivation raises cortisol and worsens insulin sensitivity. The result: more hunger, more cravings, more insulin, more fat storage, especially visceral fat. 1 week of poor sleep can measurably impair glucose control. This is how deeply sleep shapes metabolism. During deep sleep, the body restores hormonal balance. Growth hormone rises. Repair accelerates. Inflammation decreases. Without sufficient sleep, the body remains in survival mode. And survival mode favors fat storage. So if someone asks for the fastest way to shrink visceral fat, the answer is not simply eat less. It is Sleep deeply enough for your metabolism to function correctly. Because fat loss is not merely a matter of discipline. It is a matter of biological cooperation, consistency. Beats intensity. The fastest way to lose visceral fat is not through extreme effort. Extreme diets create stress. Extreme workouts create fatigue. Extreme restriction creates rebound. The body resists chaos, but it responds to consistency, stable blood sugar. Regular movement, quality sleep, repeated fasting windows, reduced stress. These steady signals gradually tell the body it is safe to release stored energy, and when the body feels safe, visceral fat begins to shrink. The body is always adapting to the environment we create. So the question becomes, what environment are we creating inside ourselves? One of overload, or one of metabolic trust? Because visceral fat is often the body's adaptation to chaos, and shrinking it is often the body's response to order. The deeper truth when people say they want to lose belly fat, what they often mean is that they want to feel better, lighter, stronger, clearer, healthier. Visceral fat loss matters not because of appearance, but because of vitality. Because when visceral fat shrinks, inflammation decreases, insulin improves. Energy rises, hormones stabilize. Risk falls. The body becomes more efficient, and efficiency is life. So the fastest way to shrink visceral fat is not a hack, it is a return to biological principles. Eat in a way that lowers insulin. Fast long enough to access stored fuel. Build muscle to improve metabolism. If you found this message valuable, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for daily insights into the science of health.